Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 21st, 2024. It has been 3,798 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 122 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 119 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Thursday and Friday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. In our assessment, Russia has started a second offensive with new operational goals. 2. Our assessment that the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox remains accurate, with autocrat Vladimir Putin issuing new nuclear threats. 3. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 4. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed over 80% of its combined thermal and power plant capacity, is a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March the 5th. 5. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 6. Autocrat Putin is continuing the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense led by the FSB since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 7. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Last night, Ukrainian air defenses intercepted all 4 Russia Kh-59 air-to-ground guided missiles launched at Ukraine. There was an update about the 3 UMPK glide bombs that struck the city of Kharkiv on June the 20th, causing damage at a children's camp. An adjacent recreation facility was also damaged, and 1 woman was injured. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombed the settlement of Kruhlyakivka, wounding 1 civilian. In the Donetsk Oblast, the VKS bombed Kostiantynivka, targeting civilian housing. 1 person was killed and another wounded. West of Kostiantynivka, the village of Roskishne was hit by Smerch rockets with cluster munitions in violation of international humanitarian law. 3 civilians were killed and another 4 were wounded, including a 14-year-old. After the attack, Russia conducted a double-tap strike targeting engineers trying to repair power and natural gas lines. No one was injured. A Russian first-person view, or FPV one-way drone, struck a civilian vehicle in the village of Tekstilne in the Kherson Oblast, killing the 43-year-old driver. Power was knocked out in the city of Kherson due to a Russian attack. Engineers were working to restore power. The Ministry of Energy reported that the June the 20th missile strikes on Ukraine power plants wounded 7 engineers, with 1 in serious condition. Satellite images showed that the Kryvyi Rih thermal power plant near Zelenodolsk had stopped operating, with Ukrainian officials confirming the facility had been knocked offline. Here is today's action report. Russia carried out 158 assaults on Wednesday and at least 122 through Thursday evening. Through June the 19th, the 7-day moving average increased to 126 and will likely keep climbing. It is possible that a new peak, higher than the spring-summer offensive, will be reached by early next week. Long-time readers and listeners may remember our earlier assessment that Russia's ability to produce cruise and ballistic missiles had reached its maximum capacity, and money, sanctions, and a lack of skilled labor would prevent additional increases. That was over a year ago. Andriy Yusov, the spokesperson for the Defense Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine, told Ukrainska Pravda that Russia has, quote, reached the peak of their capabilities and have been steadily at it for a year. Compared to 12 months ago, the total number of Russian missiles used in attacks on Ukraine has declined, with no strikes from the P-800 Onyx in almost a year. Russia has also used an increasingly mixed group of missiles to stage its attacks, with serial numbers on debris revealing that they are moving from the factory to air bases almost as quickly as they can be produced. This is cold comfort for Ukraine, with its electrical generation capacity shattered due to delays in United States military aid in 2023. We maintain our early assessments that Russia and Iran can only produce 375 to 400 Shahed-136 one-way drones per year, and as Ukraine gets more short-range air defense systems, their success rate will settle between 5 and 10%. The table for Russian versus Ukrainian equipment losses was updated using information from the Oryx database through June 20, 2024. And includes the losses suffered during the Prigozhin insurrection of June 23–24, 2023. There's too much information for me to cover in the podcast, but if you subscribe to our Patreon, you can access our almost daily situation reports, which includes all the details. There is more information and a link in the podcast description. Now let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipsy-Vovchansk area of operation, or AO. Fighting continued in Vovchansk with no significant change in the situation. Chechen Ahmad shared a video showing 3 FPV one-way drones striking the bombed-out remains of a home in Vovchansk, with 3 Ukrainian soldiers in it. They likely had a bad headache after the attack, but the video doesn't show any successful hits on the troops. However, it did confirm our current line of conflict. The Ukrainian 36th Marine Brigade repulsed an attack west of Tykhe and captured several Russian positions. Ukrainian forces made marginal gains in Staritsa, pushing Russian troops to the northeast. The video showed Ukrainian troops operating freely in the western part of the village. Ukrainian forces continue to make slow progress in Hloboke and Lukyanty, where house-to-house fighting continues. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed it hit Lipty with a FAB-3000 UMPK glide bomb, missing its target of a 4-story apartment building. We are very skeptical, as the only aircraft capable of carrying the FAB-3000 are the Tu-95MS, Tu-22M3 and the Tu-160 strategic bombers. The maximum possible glide range is 70 kilometers if Russian claims are to be believed. Strategic aviation flying that close to Ukraine would have caused an air raid alert for most of Ukraine and would have been publicly reported. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces carried out 16 attacks in the direction of Sinkivka, Stepova-Novoselivka and Peshchane. A Russian tank was destroyed by multiple FPV one-way drones east of Peshchane. Based on the geolocation, there was a minor change to the line of conflict north of Berestova. In the Svatovo AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces shifted their attacks. Fighting was reported east of Stelmachivka and on the edge of occupied Serhiivka. In the Kremenna AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russia carried out attacks in the direction of Nevske, Terny and in the Serebryanka woods. 2 Russian soldiers were captured in Serebrenka, and a Russian BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle was destroyed northwest of Kremenna. There were no changes in territorial control that we can share this time. Let's talk about the Donbas and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siverskaya, Russian forces carried out 4 assaults on the village of Rozdolivka. The situation for Ukrainian troops is very difficult. In the Kostiantynivka, there were no changes to the line of conflict. Fighting continued on the edges of Kalinivka, the canal district of Chasiv Yar, and near the Novy microdistrict. Russian forces continued their attempt to advance from the western edge of Ivanivske back into Klishchiivka and in the direction of Andriivka. The 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade has been deployed to the Kostiantynivka AO to provide additional reinforcements to Ukraine's defensive lines. In the Toretsk-New York AO, Russia carried out 7 attacks east of Toretsk, near Shumy, and east of New York. There were no changes in territorial control. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, the heaviest fighting continues to be in the Avdiivka AO, where Russian forces carried out at least 48 assaults. Most of the attacks were launched from occupied Ocheretine, Arkhangelske, and Novobakhmutivka. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Oleksandropol, deeper into Novoalexandrivka and Sokil, and in the directions of Vozdvizhenka and Novoselivka Persha were unsuccessful. Russian mercenary Melblogo Vogonzo reported fighting continued east of Yasnobrodivka and the outskirts of Karlivka. In the Vuhledar AO, Russian attacks within Krasnohorivka have become positional. Russian attempts to advance south from occupied Pobeda, deeper into Georgiivka, past Paraskoviivka, and in the direction of Kostiantynivka from south of Novomykhailivka failed. There was limited fighting in the Vremivka AO. A Russian assault in the direction of Rivnopil from occupied Volodine ended in failure. United States Internet edgelord Jackson Hinkle shared a picture of himself holding a Russian flag with the logo of the defunct private military company Wagner Group superimposed on it, claiming he was in the Donbas. Geolocation of the photos indicated that Hinkle, a United States citizen, has entered occupied Ukraine illegally and was in Mariupol and the port city of Berdyansk in Zaporizhia Oblast. On the Sea of Azov, the fuel depot at Port Azov in the Rostov region of Russia continued to burn for a 4th day. The Ministry of Emergency Situations said that high winds spread the fire and that they couldn't control the fire due to a lack of personnel and specialized equipment. Overnight, the Russian Ministry of Defense claims it shot down 120 drones in one of the largest attacks conducted by Ukraine. Video recorded in Krasnodar, in the Krasnodar Krai, shows that a Russian boiler house for hot water and heat successfully intercepted at least 1 drone. A drone shot down by Russian air defense hit a bus at the Yuzhna Stanitsa in Krasnodar, wounding 4. Also, in the Krasnodar Krai, Russian state media reported that the thermal power plant in Afipsky was hit by at least 1 Ukrainian drone, but the amount of damage was unknown. A Ukrainian drone struck the Ilsky oil refinery, reportedly wounding 2 and sparking a fire in some outbuildings. NASA Fire Information for Resource Management Systems showed a large fire was burning just west of the Yeysk military airfield. Local videos showed 2 significant secondary explosions, although we could not assess what was burning. Russian state media claimed that a drone was shot down in Volgograd, but a local video indicated that if it was hit, it was just before striking its target.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com@malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. Someone changed the sign, as it has been 0 days since a Russian government official has threatened nuclear war. During a state visit to Vietnam, nuclear weapon enthusiast and autocrat Vladimir Putin said that if Russia suffers a strategic defeat in Ukraine, quote, this means the end of its statehood. This means the end of the 1,000-year history of the Russian state. I think this is clear to everyone. Then the question arises, why should we be afraid? Isn't it better to go to the end? Putin went on to say that Moscow was, quote, considering making changes to its nuclear doctrine, claiming that a potential adversary was working on, quote, lowering the threshold nuclear weapon use. Moscow has gone out of its way to remind everyone since mid-2021 that the end of Russia would be an existential crisis and enough reason to initiate a first strike with nuclear weapons. Moving to assessment. Autocrat Putin is trying to stop the rapidly increasing support for Ukraine as the combat potential for each Russian soldier declines, and the predicted critical shortages of armor and mobility now 12 to 18 months away. Making empty threats to use nuclear weapons is a core pillar of Russian military doctrine, but any threat should be treated seriously. The claim comes days after the Russian autocrat purged the last remaining leaders in the Ministry of Defense attached to former Minister Sergei Shoigu. No need to build a bunker. Zambia signed the Peace Summit's communiqué, returning the number of signatories to 80. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba blamed Swiss officials for announcing the initial list of signatories too soon and including names of countries that hadn't formally signed the document. Speaking on Marathon, he said that other nations were still reviewing the language and would likely be adding their approval in the near future. The Dutch parliament voted to approve the framework for European Union accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova, clearing the last hurdle for formal negotiations. New Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof had previously declared he supported accession talks but would require formal approval from Parliament. The first meeting between the EU, Ukraine and Moldova will be held on June the 25th. Ukrainian hackers knocked the Russian electronic payment systems Mir, Sberbank, VTB, Tinькофф, Beeline, MTS and the Vkontakte online payments offline. Ukraine shared its findings after analyzing the T-62 turtle tank that it captured in Klishchiivka. The turret was unable to rotate, and there was no ammunition and no explosive reactive armor. There was almost no outside visibility, with only the driver able to have a view of the battlefield. The captured Russian soldiers said that it was being used as an improvised armored personnel carrier. Pending a vote from NATO, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte will become the new Secretary General. President of Romania Klaus Iohannis announced he was dropping his bid to lead the defensive alliance. German defense company Rheinmetall announced it had received the largest ammunition contract in its history, $7.8 billion. The Bundestag placed the new contract. The 155mm artillery rounds will be used to replenish German reserves and support Ukraine, Denmark, Estonia and the Netherlands. The first shells are slated to be delivered in early 2025. The United States defense company Northrop Grumman announced it would start production of 120mm tank rounds and 155mm artillery ammunition in Ukraine. Director of International Business at Northrop Grumman Defense Systems, Dave Bartel, said Ukraine is funding the new factory. Romanian President Iohannis announced that the Supreme Council of Defense of the country authorized the transfer of a Patriot battery to Ukraine. The statement added that the, quote, donation is made on the condition that our country continues its negotiations with the allies, especially with the American strategic partner, in order to obtain a similar or equivalent system. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Romania, saying, quote, It will increase security throughout our region and for all of our neighbors, for Moldova, the Baltic states and Romania. White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby confirmed that the United States was reprioritizing the transfer of Patriot interceptors and AMRAAM missiles for the NASAMS air defense system to Ukraine. Kirby said it was a, quote, difficult but necessary decision, adding, quote, right now we know that Ukraine urgently needs these additional capabilities, unquote. Zelensky thanked US President Joe Biden, writing on Twitter, also known as X, quote, these additional air defense capabilities will protect Ukrainian cities and civilians. I thank President Biden for the essential support which we discussed during our recent meeting in Italy. It's time for the land of Mobiks, Mobilzation and the Mir. Autocrat Putin and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un signed a military assistance and trade agreement, which may have already backfired on Moscow. Article 4 of the agreement states that if either country is invaded and forced to declare war, the other must offer, quote, all means at its disposal without delay to provide, quote, military and other assistance. Chung Seung-chang, an analyst at South Korea's Sejong Institute, told the Associated Press that the language is close to a 1961 agreement between North Korea and the Soviet Union, which dissolved in 1992. In 2000, during his first visit to North Korea as president of Russia, Putin signed a toothless security agreement. During the press conference in Vietnam, Putin denied that Moscow requested additional military aid for its war of aggression against Ukraine. South Korea condemned the treaty. National Security Advisor Chang Ho-jing told reporters that Seoul was reconsidering its stance of only providing Ukraine with non-lethal aid in response to the new agreement. While South Korea provided artillery ammunition to Ukraine, it was through a three-way trade with the United States, which sent rounds from its own stock and used the Korean ammunition to replenish its reserves. Showing an amazing inability to read the room, autocrat Putin fired back, saying that if South Korea sends weapons or ammunition to Ukraine, quote, Moscow will make decisions which are unlikely to please the current leadership of South Korea. But wait, there's more. In a growing war of words, South Korea responded to Putin's veiled threat, stating that the office of the president was considering various options in supplying arms to Ukraine and that its stance would, quote, depend on how Russia approaches this issue. Shortly after the statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned the Russian ambassador for an explanation. The Russian State Duma passed the largest tax increase in Russian history as the cost of its war of aggression against Ukraine spirals. The new tax package introduces a progressive personal income tax, raising the top bracket from 15% to 22%, and will tax the income of expats working outside of Russia. The corporate tax rate will also be increased from 20% to 25%. Beleaguered Russian company Gazprom is facing another increase in sanctions that will shrink revenue further. The EU nations have agreed on a 14th package of sanctions against Russia, including the banning of transshipment of Russian liquefied natural gas. Germany had threatened to veto the package, but reportedly withdrew its objection after negotiations with Brussels. Finally, Russian soldiers shared pictures of themselves creating homemade contact ERA armor modules from scavenged explosives and empty blocks due to shortages. Everything is going to plan. And that's what we know. Join me on Monday and, with or without electricity, we'll do it all over again. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.